Alright, so in this video I'm going to be going over a simple application I built in order to demonstrate the use of these Lucia APIs that I went over in the last video. And really it's quite simple. There's a sign-in page, a sign-up. I can log in with one of my accounts here. And once I log in, it brings me back to the home page, and I can go to my profile, view my username, and then I can log out. So overall, it's pretty simple. I mainly just did this to get a bare bones, really bare bones application up and running using that Lucia API we went over in the last video. And an important thing to note here is you can go over to the Lucia GitHub repo, and there's a bunch of projects here. You can click on some of these examples. I used one of the ones in just the /examples repo, but you can also find more detailed and comprehensive examples. For example, Next.js email password two-factor authentication, one with a Svelte kit, one with a web authentication. So I'll be linking these in the description, but for the time being, we'll just be focusing on how to use that API in order to make a pretty simple app in Next.js. Okay, and this is the code base for the application I just showed you. This is in Next.js, and it uses the app router. We can see there's 3 folders here: login, profile, and sign up. And firstly, I want to start with the database. So if we go in this lib folder, there's the schema.sql. This has 2 tables here, one for the user and one for the session. The session table should look pretty familiar after the last video. It has an ID, user ID, and expires at field. And the user table also is pretty simple. It's got an ID, a username, and a password hash. And then if we go to the db.ts, all this does is create a database and export it using Better SQLite 3. And then lastly, we have this auth.ts file. And this should look very familiar because it's pretty much copy-pasted exactly from that Lucia documentation. I did make a few changes to the to how it called the database, just because I'm using, I think, a slightly different way of connecting to the database. I'm not using an adapter, for instance. But besides that, the logic is pretty much the same. And then I also have 2 small files here, initdb.ts and cleardb.ts, which are just utilities that help me manage the database, since I am using an SQLite database and I might want to clear it or set it up as required. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So let's get into the logic for some of these pages. And this code is for the sign-up page. And if we scroll down, the UI is pretty simple. It just has a form with a username input and a password input. And when you click submit, it's going to trigger the signup function on the server. If we scroll down, this is the signup function. It gets the username and it does some validation on it to make sure it's of the correct length and it doesn't contain certain prohibited characters. And we do the same thing with the password field. And then we check to see if there's an existing user in our database that has the same username, because in the schema.sql, we only allow usernames that are unique. So we want to make sure there's no duplicates. And then after that, we create the password hash. I'm using bcrypt, but you can also use Argon 2. And then lastly, we get the user ID and we insert the new user into our database with our user ID, username, and password hash. And lastly, this code is going to look pretty familiar because this is right from the Lucia API. We get the token from the generate session token function, and then we create the session using this create session function that takes in the token that we have and also the user ID from the user we just created. And then lastly, there is this function for set session token cookie. And if I scroll up, this is the function right here. It takes in the token, it takes in the expires at date, and it gets the cookie store using Next.js. And it uses this cookie store.set function in order to take our session token we have and create a cookie for the user and put the token as the value for that cookie. And here are some options for this function. And you can look right here at the Lucia documentation. This has a bit more information on what these options are doing. So I would recommend taking a look at that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That creates a cookie with our session token on it for the user. So anytime they make a request to our backend, we're able to get the user information from that. Okay, now I'm back on the application, and in particular, I'm on the signup page, and I just filled in a username and a password, and I opened up the developer tools. We can see on the cookies tab that there's no cookies except for this random Next.js thing they have going for caching purposes. So now when I create an account, we can see it adds a new cookie with the name session, and this is the value of the token that we created. And then I can go to the profile. This token is how we're getting the username on the back end, is we can find our session that has this corresponding token, and we can get the user ID off of that, and then we can use the user ID in order to identify the logged in user. And then we can see if I click log out, that gets rid of the token there, and that effectively logs me out. So yeah, that's it. I'll get back to the code and look at the login page. This is the code for the login page. We can see it's very similar to what existed on the signup page. On the front end, we just have a form that has an input for username and an input for password. And when we submit it, this will trigger this login function on the server. And what we do here is we get the username, we do some validation checks on it. Same with the password, some more validation checks that were present in the signup page. And then we get the existing user that exists for the username that was passed in. If none does, then we throw an error. And then we validate the password that was passed in by the user with the existing user's password hash. If they do not compare, or if this function does not return true, then we can return an error to the front end. And after that, we generate a new session token because we do want to log them in. And we create a new session. And then we do what we did in the signup page. We just set the session token on the cookie and we redirect them to the home page. All right, and this is the profile page. And what we do here is we get the cookie store using this cookies function in Next.js, and we get the session token. And it's important to note that this is an async function, so all this happens on the server. And if there's no session token, well, that means the user's not logged in. We can just redirect them. However, if there is one, we validate it using this function that we remember from the Lucia API. And once we get the user from that, if there's no user, we redirect them to log in again. However, if we do get a user, then we can look for all of the usernames in this database where the user ID is equal to the user ID we get from this validate session token function. And once again, if we don't get anything from that, we just redirect. But that's what we're showing down here is the user data.username. So that's actually showing the username for the logged in user, which we get from that session token. And then what we can go to as well is the navbar. If we look at the navbar clients, we see there's this logout button here, which has this function logout. And all that's doing here is it creates a cookie store and it gets the session token from that. And if there is one found, then all we need to do is invalidate the session and delete it from the user's browser. So really that's the whole application there, right? We covered signing up, logging in, and logging out, and then also going to a profile page to get the user information using that session token. So overall, pretty simple application. Now, obviously, there's a lot of things missing from this, right? So we did the basic logic, but this is a very simple app, and we want to do things that are more complex in a real-world application. So our example does technically work, but we don't handle certain things. Like we don't handle two-factor authentication, email verification, rate limiting for getting passwords, all that stuff, right? So in a real-world application, we would want to, actually handle that kind of logic. And fortunately for those examples, we can go to the Lucia GitHub page, and they have some good real-world examples here where they're doing a lot more than we're doing in our simple application. So they have like an example for one in Next.js, but it has email, password, two-factor authentication. And if we go here, we can see that this is actually a bit more complicated, than what we have. So they have like one function for two-factor authentication. They have a function for password resets. They have rate limits. They have a bunch of more stuff. So I would recommend, if you're actually going to implement this in a future project, definitely check out the full example they have here instead of my pretty simple one. All I'm doing here is kind of showing you the ropes, and then you can go and explore this in more depth. And that's something I might do in the future as well. Leave any comments below. Let me know if you want me to cover this example as well. I can do that. I think that might be a fun thing to do. So, thanks for watching, guys, and have a great day.